Minister, keep up.
Great. Okay. I'm going to suggest that we get started despite our technical glitches. Yeah, we're getting a thumbs up from the back, so that's always good. A very warm welcome to all of you, dear colleagues, excellencies, distinguished participants, and guests, both online, who I believe are online with us now, and as well as those in the room. We're very grateful to have you join us. This is the event entitled SDG16, Accelerating Progress to Achieve Justice for Children with the North America Advisory Meeting for the World Congress on Justice with Children. The catchiest title ever, but it is telling you what we're up to for today. So first, may I just say, for the many people that are online, this event is a side event to the annual high-level political forum at the UN in New York. And while it's perhaps very far removed from the realities of children's day-to-day lives and the injustices that they may face, it's one of the many influential spaces globally, because this is where governments meet to hear from each other. And it has the potential to really shape the policy directions and priorities that governments choose. And so we're here today because we recognize governments here during the high-level political forum are holding each other to account on their progress in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's an especially important year because this is marking the midpoint of the Agenda 2030. I'm Professor Jennifer Davidson. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Inspiring Children's Futures at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland. And we are a member of the Justice Action Coalition, a high-ambition coalition of countries and organizations who are championing people-centered justice and equal access to justice for all. And I lead its international multi-agency SDG16 working group on justice for children, which has a strategic vision of putting children at the center of efforts to achieve justice for all. The working group is hosted at the Inspiring Children's Futures Institute with the support from the Pathfinders for Peace, Just and Inclusive Societies, and welcome to my colleagues from there today. That is a key multi-stakeholder platform to accelerate progress on peace, justice, and inclusion. And we're also supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And the working group has a whole range of excellent partners that we work with, and I won't go through a whole list of them because I know that we're already a little bit short on time, but they include organizations that are delivering services throughout the world and also are working at the UN, including the SRSG, Violence Against Children, as well as the Legal Empowerment Fund. I am joined by Mr. Cédric Foussard, and he will be speaking to us about the World Congress. And this day today is shaped in two parts. We are first talking about the high-level political agenda around SDG16, and then we are moving into the more granular and making it real for children in our North American session on exploring good practices in relation to justice for children. And I wish to continue just my opening thanks here by thanking the governments of Canada, of Mexico, and Belgium for their sponsorship of this event, and to the event organizers, the working group, the Global Initiative on Justice with Children, and the University of Strathclyde, as well as Baker McKenzie for this fantastic support. And we'll be hearing from my colleagues from Baker McKenzie in just a moment. We're also joined by a child and youth delegation who are members of the participation task force of the working group, both in person and online. And so I'd like to extend a very special and warm welcome to Osish, who's here in person and will be co-moderating with me in a moment. And you'll meet Osish, as well as to Januka and Dhruv, who are not able to be here, but they are online, and we are 100% behind their participation and engagement in the work that's led up to this event, as well as being here with us today in this session. We wish to also thank our speakers, and we'll be introducing those speakers very shortly. I'm going to hand over to Cédric Foussard for the next part.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I'm not sure if it's working.
Yeah.
It is? Perfect. Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you for Canada and Mexico and Belgium to support us with this event, and our colleagues from Baker McKenzie as well. I wanted to join you, Jennifer, in those. Thank you. So as you explained, Jennifer, this event is double phase. There is a part of the high-level political forum, and as well, the objective is to feed the reflection around the preparation of the next World Congress on Justice with Children 7. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about this initiative. So in 2019, during the 30th anniversary of the Convention of the Rights of the Child, Terre des Hommes Foundation launched the Global Initiative on Justice with Children with its partners. And the objective of the Global Initiative is to keep the momentum on child justice in the international agenda. So we, to do so, we organize each 5 years the World Congresses on Justice with Children with the aim to define strategies of action to ensure a fair access to justice for children worldwide. So after Lima in 2009, Geneva in 2015, Paris with the UNESCO in 2018, we were really pleased to get the support of Mexico and in particular of the Supreme Court of Mexico to organize a World Congress in this beautiful country. Unfortunately, due to COVID, as you can imagine, we were online, like most things happening at that time. That was a challenge, but we managed to get on 1 week event more than 5,000 participants from 150 countries. And from an intergenerational perspective, as the Congress was for the first time co-organized by children with life experience themselves. In between each World Congresses, we organize those advisory or preparatory meetings, like the one of today as well, in order to brainstorm about the different justice priorities, challenges, and good practices as well at national or regional level. But we take the opportunity of going around the world to organize those meetings to develop specific trainings for lawyers, child rights advocates, judges, magistrates, etc. So before the 2021 World Congress, we organized 14 preparatory meetings everywhere, including China, Pakistan, Colombia, Mexico, etc. And then for the last 2 years, we had the great opportunity to work with the Thai Justice Institute to organize a preparatory meeting in Thailand, in Spain, and then in Singapore later on. This year, we'll go to India and Colombia. So today, this meeting is as well part of the reflection on the organization of the next World Congress, which will be in Madrid in 2025, and where you are, of course, all welcome. One of the great support and partner of the World Congress is the Pro Bono department of Baker McKenzie. So I wanted to welcome and thank you again, Catherine and Andrew, for having us today, and leave you the floor.
Thank you, Cedric, and thank you, Jennifer. It's such an honor to host this event today. Our remarks are going to be pretty limited to just welcoming you into our physical space. And we just also wanted to convey what a privilege it is to work with Angela Vahil, who is our global director of our Pro Bono program. I think Andrew and I are both fan clubs, avid members of her fan club, but also we work extensively with her. And we, we've had such meaningful projects with her, including working on the handbook for homeless youth, and I've written various white papers on the juvenile justice system in state court. But yeah, we're so privileged to. This feels like kind of a rarefied air, which after listening to your opening remarks, it really feels like the kickoff to a very meaningful discussion. So yes, thank you for coming, everybody, and welcome.
I'll just briefly echo what Catherine said, and just to give a taste of the type of work that we do in the Pro Bono group, specifically focused on the U.S. Right now, I'm one of the lead counsel on a case where we're suing several school districts in Florida to overturn what's called the Don't Say Gay law that the Florida Congress has basically forced on the school districts to prohibit certain discussion in classrooms related to sexual orientation and gender identity that is really just impacting children. They're the ones who are suffering from not having classroom instruction, which has led many schools and teachers to remove all books from classrooms. So that's, we feel it everywhere. Children really need a voice. And so thank you to everything that you do We at Baker McKenzie and the pro bono team, we support what you do, and we hope that this is a good discussion.
Thank you very much to Andrew and Catherine and to Cedric. And I have a few words to say about setting the scene for the next piece, but I'm going to suggest that Cedric, Catherine and Andrew, you may wish to not be sitting up here while we go into the next session. So thank you very much again. And we'll move into our next session with Osish. Thank you, Helen. Osish, if you'd like to come and join me, and also if our ambassadors would like to come and join us here on the floor as well. Sure. Thank you. We are delighted to have with us today Ambassador Robert Ray and Ambassador Alicia Buenrostro, Massieu. Thank you very much. Your leadership and government leadership in particular is so useful. Thank you very much. Great. May I start by setting the scene and then handing the floor to you, Ambassador Ray? And great. So we're now moving into the session, which is about SDG16 and thinking about our global agenda and our ambition for realizing justice for children. And perhaps it's worth describing to you, for those of you that may not know about the SDG and the agenda, SDGs and the Agenda 2030, that there's a pledge that all countries have made to not only leave no one behind, but also to address the furthest behind first, as it's said. And I'll remind us, although perhaps this audience isn't needing the kind of reminding, that children under the age of 18 are 30% of the world's population, and in many countries, over half the population is under the age of 18. And yet, children are amongst the most at risk of being left behind, especially those already facing the greatest adversities. And this intersectional nature of injustice is exaggerated for children. And we were at an event yesterday looking at the evidence around justice and children, and my young colleague Osish made a very important reflection about the invisibility of children in the context of the evidence and data that we collect even in relation to justice. So while we're at the halfway point to 2030, there's a stark gap when it comes to measuring, to understanding, and fulfilling our global ambition for justice for children. And this is exacerbating inequalities and adversely is affecting the chances of achieving justice for children. And we recognize that if we don't achieve justice for children, we won't achieve our ambition to be achieving justice for all. And so today, our extraordinary range of determined partners have come together to call for an acceleration in the implementation of fair and child-friendly justice systems. And we learn from each other as we hear about examples and efforts that are being made globally. I am really delighted to be introducing you to my colleague, Osish. Osish is a child advisor for the SDG16 Justice for Children project. And Osish and I are going to be jointly co-moderating the session, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to grab your microphone?
Yeah.
And we can maybe think about
That's fine.
Okay, so I would like to first introduce you to our first speaker. This is His Excellency Ambassador Robert Ray, who's a permanent representative of Canada to the United Nations, and I'd like to invite him to give us his opening remarks, and then we'll introduce our next ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador Ray.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm delighted to be able to join with Alicia, my colleague from Mexico, and with all of you on the panel to speak directly to you about a couple of critical issues and access to justice issues. I also want to thank Baker McKenzie, their pro bono practice, the working group on SDG16, Justice for Children, the Global Initiative on Justice with Children, and everyone here for allowing us to have this discussion. As you know, just to put it in context, we're about to have a series of meetings at the UN in New York that are going to touch on the SDGs and on the achievement of the SDGs. My minister, who's responsible for the SDGs in Canada, Karina Gould, will be here next week, and she will be speaking, and Canada is going to be making a national statement where we will be explaining some of what we have been able to achieve, but also some of the challenges that are still remaining. So my remarks should be taken in that context. Our objective as a country is to ensure that every child and every young person has the chance to thrive in a peaceful, just, and inclusive society. Now that's a important ambition. It's also important to recognize that when we talk about justice, we're not only talking about criminal justice and issues around procedural justice in the legal system. We're also talking about social outcomes, the justice in which the just society in which people are living. And in that context, I just want to mention 2 or 3 things that I think are important for you to know about what we have been doing on the positive side, if you like. First is that in 2016, the government introduced a national child tax credit, which has had the effect of lifting literally hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. And it's a program which I think is generally recognized as, because of the targeted and very progressive nature of the child tax credit, it's having a profoundly redistributive effect, and it's a positive move. The second is that the government has signed agreements with all of the provinces and territories in order to ensure affordable childcare, which, as a father and now a grandfather, I can tell you, seeing what the costs of the system have been over the last 20 years is quite a remarkable program, and is having a substantial effect on access to childcare and the affordability of the access to childcare right across the country. Third one I'd comment on is housing, where again, it's something that requires a response from all 3 levels of government in Canada: municipal, provincial, and federal, as a shared jurisdiction. But again, we're seeing levels of funding and engagement on the housing issue, which has taken us out of a long period of drought, if you will, on social housing expenditures. A drought which I think I can say without fear of contradiction dates back to the day upon which I was defeated as Premier of Ontario in 1995. And my last comment would be just to remember that in looking at the Canadian social system and our economic system, it's important to remember that we are a federal country, like Mexico. And so it's not just what the federal government does. Federal government has responsibility for the criminal justice system, in the sense it's responsible for the criminal code and the organization of the criminal code, but provincial governments have the responsibility for the delivery of social programs and also for the administration of justice. So it requires intense cooperation between the 2 levels of government in order to be able to achieve the kind of objectives that we want to achieve. I think it's important to look at a few things that are happening at the federal level that represent an advance. The first is that we've had significant recent amendments to the Divorce Act. The Divorce Act is a federal piece of legislation which requires parents, family justice professionals, and judges to consider a child's views and preferences when making decisions about parenting responsibilities. We've had a series of legal decisions which clearly have taken government in this direction, but now we have a federal legislation which is saying this is now the policy which has to be put in place. And so the principle of the best interest of the child is a principle that is now enshrined in federal legislation. We've also launched a child rights impact assessment tool, which is helping to guide federal officials on how to consider children's rights when developing initiatives. And in addition, I think it's important to stress that at the international level, when we look at the situation in Myanmar, which we're just discussing at the UN this morning, and we'll be discussing it again tomorrow, we have in all of our work with the practical work of the United Nations in supporting the International Criminal Court, the independent investigative mechanism for Myanmar, in all these issues, we're asking those courts to look specifically at crimes affecting children and what more can be done to advance the interests of children. And in particular, that involves working with children in conflict. This is the 20th anniversary of the Youth Criminal Justice Act in Canada, which continued a long-standing tradition of ensuring that children, that is to say, people under the age of 18, are treated differently and separately from the way in which those who are not children are treated in the criminal justice system. This debate goes back a long way to the questions of juvenile delinquency and how juvenile delinquency legislation was passed. Legislation's name has obviously been changed for obvious reasons. But the premise of that legislation is to ensure that we are addressing the specific needs of children in a way that clearly makes it clear that their interests have to be first. And we've seen since that time a significant decrease in the youth crime rate, an increase in the use of diversion and community-based sentencing, and a reduction in the use of detention and custody for youth. So that's the good news. The good news is that the impact of this legislation and the approaches that have intended to be used with it have been positive. So what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is that we continue to see that Indigenous children and Black children in particular do not see the same reductions in the rate of incarceration and in how they are treated in the justice system. And we continue to see a dramatic or substantial overrepresentation of children as victims and offenders. And so we have to, the government has made a very conscious decision to say, we now have the data, we know what the data is telling us. It's telling us that Black kids and Indigenous kids are more likely to end up in jail, that they're overrepresented in jail, and that this is creating a significant problem if we're serious about changing the way this is. So the process of responding to it has led the government to introduce a Black justice strategy and the Indigenous justice strategy, as well as a number of child advocacy centers and child advocates in our court, which are intended to see what further steps have to be taken in order to ensure that we don't see this level of what is in effect systemic discrimination in the justice system, which is a clear challenge. So to conclude, and the words that I know always make people breathe a sigh of relief, but to conclude, what I've tried to do is what I know our minister is going to do next week. And that is to say, look, our approach has to be driven by evidence. It has to be driven by the data. It has to be driven by what we know are the facts in the situation. There's no point in sugarcoating the story. The story is, as a country, we have made progress, and we're making progress with respect to the extent to which there is widespread acceptance of this continuing focus of the best interests of the child, and ensuring that when the best interests of the child are concerned in the criminal justice system, that we are actually pursuing policies which will have the effect of reducing the rate of crime and reducing the rate of incarceration. We then have to say, okay, that's the good side of things. Where are we failing? Failing or falling behind? And we know where we're falling behind, and that is in particular with respect to Black kids and Indigenous children. And that is where we continue to face a challenge in our justice system, which, again, if I may say so, takes us back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is that in looking at the situation affecting people in the justice system, and I say this as a former politician and somebody who's dealt a lot with justice issues in my political life, it's critical to look at the social circumstances under which people are living, at the economic circumstances under which people are living. And I know that the only way we will have a successful strategy with respect to Black youth and Indigenous youth is if we have successful social policies and economic policies for those kids. And if we don't succeed in doing that, we will not succeed in changing the way in which they're treated in the justice system. And so I think that's the challenge we face. That's simply what we have to live up to and face up to as we go forward. So with that, I'll stop and pass it over to Alicia. And thank you so much for the opportunity to say a few words. You may have something you want to say, Jennifer, here.
Ambassador Ray, thank you very much. And it's always such a privilege, I think, for us to be hearing from politicians who speak about not sugarcoating the story. And so I'd like to affirm both the messages you've given us, and if it's not too cheeky to say, also the honesty with which you're naming. And I know that we've heard from Canada in various arenas about the owning of the challenge and what's at stake, and the interconnectivity of bringing in social policies to be able to address ultimately properly the challenges that Canada is facing, as you've described, but we recognize in so many other places, don't we, that these are issues that are global issues that are faced by every country. And so your learning is so important to all of us to ensure that children around the world are benefiting. I'm going to hand things to Osish to introduce our next speaker. Thank you, Ambassador Ray.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I'm Osish, and firstly, thank you, Ambassador Robert Rai, for your insights, for your ideas and remarks. So without any time waste, I would like to introduce you to Her Excellency Ambassador Alicia Buenrostro Massieu, permanent representative of Mexico to the United Nations, and I would love to give this floor to her.
Thank you very much, Osish. I would like to thank as well Cedric and Jennifer. It's really amazing to see that Baker and McKenzie and Pathfinders and Justice for Children are doing and undertaking an endeavor like this one, trying to push forward SDG16. It really makes you feel relieved, you know, knowing that there are many people out there and organizations that really takes this very seriously. And that's the way my country takes this issue as well of justice for children. And I will try to resume a little bit of what Mexico has been doing in the multilateral forum in this regard, and what are the principles that we support, because we believe these principles are very important to push forward justice for children. So I think we feel very important as well, because as Cedric mentioned here, Mexico was part of the organizing committee of the Global Congress on Justice for Children that was hosted online on its 2021 edition. So first of all, I would like to say that the interrelated crises that afflict the world population create a very grim environment riddled with challenges as poverty, inequalities, international conflicts, climate change, among other issues that leave children, for sure, undeservedly exposed. And as a result, we must redouble our efforts to address these issues. And the only way to do it is to be consistent and undertake actions, as Ambassador Ray just mentioned, in terms of public policies, social policies that are for everybody and that can benefit everybody without any distinction. Knowing in particular that rights of children should be respected and protected, and that is the first principle. Justice, as we know, does not occur in a vacuum, nor does it happen by pure commitment. So actions focused on strengthening the social fabric become a catalyzer to foster conducive environments that allow justice to materialize. So I would like to mention the 4 areas or actions that have been important for Mexico and that have guided our way forward when it comes to achieve justice with and for children. One is the change of paradigm. The fulfillment of the rights of children has been lagging in comparison with other type of rights, precisely because we have been transitioning from a paternalistic scheme based on protection of children and adolescents into one where we accept that they are fully rights holders. In this regard, in Mexico, our Supreme Court of Justice recently ruled that marriage and concubinage are similar institutions, but with constitutionally valid legal differences. In such a case, the court reiterated that families go beyond blood links, which advances the concept of viewing children as rights holders, swaying away from a purely paternalistic scheme. For us, a very important principle as well is the participation and inclusion in society. Governments can achieve an active, full, equal, and meaningful participation of children in decision-making processes, and that we believe that is very important. The Committee on the Rights of the Child outlines key working methods for the participation of children in the reporting process of the committees, outlining good practices for enabling inclusion of children in decision-making processes. In line with the convention, Mexico established the general law of the rights of children and adolescents that, among others, states that authorities must ensure a comprehensive, cross-cutting, and human rights-based approach in the design and implementation of government policies and programs. 3 is knowledge, and already Bob has mentioned this. Effective disaggregation of data is imperative for expanding knowledge among citizens and government authorities. Knowledge consists of understanding how to gather testimonies of children, particularly in situations of violence and vulnerability. To receive a testimony or approaching a child to perceive their feelings depends on their age and stage of development. Training authorities to learn how to engage better with children could improve government's knowledge of the issues and solutions. And mental health. Mental health has been an issue that Mexico has undertaken very seriously when we were part of the Security Council until a few months ago. So we brought the first resolution of mental health to the Security Council, and we just approved a couple of weeks ago a second one, which was the first one in the General Assembly as well. We are absolutely decisive when we say that we must protect the mental health of children in all stages of childhood. And that is super important because it really means how the child will conduct his life at a later stage. Early stage trauma and psychosocial issues at a young age can have a strong ripple effect through the individual's adolescence and adulthood. In this regard, we must explore ways to better deliver mental health and psychosocial support services. As I said, Mexico has been advancing this idea in all fora where we take part. In addition, Mexico presents another biennial resolution entitled Protection of Children Against Bullying, with the objective of making bullying visible, preventing it, and offering solutions for its attention and eradication, including through recognizing its root causes, such as multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. And with this, I believe that these are the principles that guide our work in the multilateral fora when it comes to children and justice. And we reiterate our commitment to achieving justice with and for children, both in the multilateral and national levels. And again, I think that I really want to thank, Baker and McKenzie and Pathfinders and Justice for Children for organizing this event. Next week, we will have our ministers coming and also having a word at the General Assembly on this. And let me tell you and assure you that SDG16 is one of the most important SDGs that we need to look at and advance in it. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Ambassador Alicia Buenrostro Massieu. It is necessary that the inclusion of children in decision-making process of government, and also it's good to talk about mental health because if a child faces trauma in its early ages, then it may affect him or her in future too. So without ado, I would like to give this floor to Jennifer.
Thank you, Osish, and thank you, Ambassador. May I comment just on the importance that we see in the work that we've been doing together, the the influence of Mexico in supporting the World Congress was tremendous, and actually, in particular, having the Supreme Court engaged was also opened doors to Supreme Courts globally. I think also the commitments you're describing here in relation to disaggregating data, among many other issues, is so critical. And that kind of leadership that you're showing by describing the importance of these issues is so important to bringing other countries on board, and actually fits very closely with our ambition to be growing a global growing a global movement of governments who are speaking about these issues and helping others to understand the importance of these issues to the future of those countries as well as to the future of our world. So thank you to our ambassadors both for your leadership, and we look forward to seeing the next milestones ahead with the SDG Summit and the HLPF next year, where SDG16 will be a reporting goal. We are very keen for global leadership from our national governments, and seeking an ongoing partnership with you and with those in the room to keep forwarding these things. So thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you, Jennifer.
We are continuing this panel. We are going to do a little bit of a movement shift here. Please, Ambassador Ray, would you stay? I think, Ambassador Massieu, you may need to be leaving, so we are grateful to you for your contribution and look forward to an ongoing conversation with you in your office. And may I just ask our audience to thank Ambassador Massieu. Thank you. And in this seamless process, may I invite Dr. Ficette Sardian to the table, and may I invite our two colleagues who are online to become visible. Yeah, Ficette, perfect. Thank you. We have two colleagues who are joining us online. We are delighted to have both of them with us, and we will introduce them in turn when their time comes. But it's great to see you, and we know that and we can see you just so you know we are able to see you, and you've joined us in the room. And so now may I introduce you to Dr. Ficette Sardian, who will speak next. Ficette is the Executive Director of the Thailand Institute of Justice, and if you've not known about TIJ, this is an organization that is well worth you knowing about, and their leadership in Thailand and beyond is really important in driving justice reforms in very important ways, and we're delighted to have Dr. Sardian with us. Over to you, Ficette. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for your kind introduction. Thank you, Osish, for co-moderating. It's an honor to have a youth participating in this kind of event. Your Excellency, Ambassador Rhea, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to allow me and the Thailand Institute of Justice to be part of this event. I think it's quite crucial that we can be part of this important force that would work to accelerate the progress towards achieving justice for children. Let me tell you a little bit about the TIJ. Our organization has been established 12 years ago, and over that period of time, we have been working with and for the vulnerable people. Our work began with the female inmates through our work in support the implementation of the Bangkok Rules. It's a nickname for United Nations standards and norms on the treatment of women offenders, both in custodial and non-custodial settings. Our work has shown some good results, but a key concern of overcrowding in prisons has not really subsided. So we realized that in order for us to make a significant impact, we must reach vulnerable people well before and after they come into contact with the justice system. And our approach towards child-centered justice focuses on two things: collaboration and innovation. Children intersect with the justice system in many ways, be it as offenders, as victims or survivors, as well as those at risk of committing crime. So a child-centered justice approach would mean placing children at the center of everything with the goal to restore their lives. This requires a range of tools and programs to address various needs among different kind of children who have to go through journey in the justice system. This kind of approach would not be possible without cross-organizational collaboration, a practice that we at the TIJ follow in all of our work. And we now have a constantly evolving toolkit to pursue child-centered justice, developed using different kind of expertise in diverse set of subjects, for instance, technology, psychology, gaming, and architecture. And today our tools include a chatbot and predictive model for early detection of crimes, rehabilitation and growth model for victims and offenders, innovative board games for empowerment, and a physical child-friendly justice space. Due to limited time that I have today, I will just introduce you to one of our projects, which is called Piloting a Child-Friendly Justice Space. This has been ongoing at the Phuket, one of our destination province in the southern part of Thailand. And we have been working with the Provincial Office of the Public Prosecutors. This project began with our partnering with the Provincial Office of the Public Prosecutor and also Bangkok University Faculty of Architecture in order to create participatory design guidelines to improve child friendliness of the justice system. And we tried also to eliminate the traditional, often intimidatory power dynamics that emerge in such system interactions. During the implementation, TIJ also connect with another important partner, For Freedom International. And this foundation works primarily on freeing the marginalized and vulnerable from oppression. So with a few partners joining hand, we can begin to work on the design guidelines and turn it into a space prototype through a pilot renovation project. And we focus on two kinds of space, evidence preparation rooms and child investigation rooms at the Phuket Prosecutor's Office. The facility renovation was kind of a strategy for us so that we can allow everyone working in that same space to see very clearly the results. But our larger ambition was to get stakeholders on board and to build trust for making bigger changes. And towards this, we identify key champions like the police, the lawyers, judges, child welfare officers, and others associated with juvenile and family courts, and also children's families with whom we could build partnership to holistically improve children's justice journeys. Once the stakeholder trust was built, we can move on to phase 2 of the project, which aims to capture user-centered feedback through surveys in order to demonstrate the effectiveness of child-sensitive spaces. Soon we learned that a child-friendly space is only a small part of the bigger picture. In fact, we must design the entire justice journey centered around children. Our space prototype also revealed many hidden notes. For example, some personnel dealing with child witnesses must be upgrading their questioning skills. And also we learned that judges need nudging in order for them to increase the use of recording from the evidence preparation rooms. Without such training and upskilling, even the most child-friendly and user-centered facility design may not help protect children from being harmed by the justice system. The project is still ongoing. After the data collection phase, we hope to have feedback from the whole range of users, including children, parents, and service providers, in order for us to push for designing now evidence-based policy that would build a truly child-centered justice system. And essential to this would be the capacity building program that could bridge knowledge gaps, especially among service providers. In closing, a definitive proof of concept with this project is still under construction, I would say. We're also seeking suitable financial models in order to allow the scaling up of this idea in other sites. Our project would be deemed successful, in my view, if it at least informs and convinces relevant agencies that ensuring a non-re-traumatized experience for those in contact with the justice system can begin with creating an accessible and safe space for children. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And you'll be hearing a little bit later from Osish about the policy brief that's just being launched today, in which the case study that that you've described is profiled, and we can learn more from. But thank you so much for your contribution, Fisette. This has been excellent. Osish, over to you.
So thank you, Fisette, for your wonderful ideas. I love how you use the technology in the field of justice, also chatbots. I love that concept. Now, I would like to introduce everyone to Mrs. Grace Agakali, who is joining with us virtually. She is a part of Justice for Children Global Lead, UNICEF, United Nations International Children Emergency Fund. So yeah, I would like to pass the floor to her.
Thank you, Osish. Hopefully you can hear me well. I'm sorry I can't join you right now. I'm in Manila. But I'm also based in New York, and I hope to see you sometime soon. Can you hear me well, Jennifer?
We can certainly hear you. I'm just seeing if we can turn the volume up a little bit, but please continue. We can hear you. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Ray and my distinguished co-panelists, our young people in the audience and online, ladies and gentlemen, a good day to all of you. Indeed, it is a good day to discuss how to accelerate progress towards achieving the SDGs, particularly SDG16 and justice for children. UNICEF is more than pleased to join you in giving all the push needed to make the agenda for action a reality in the lives of people, especially children around the world. As you all know, in the 2021 World Congress on Justice with Children, where we came up with the agenda for action, also UNICEF launched a 10-year Reimagine Justice for Children agenda, which contributes to the operationalization of the 4 levers in the agenda for action. The Reimagine Justice for Children agenda builds on the findings and recommendations of the UN Global Study on Children Deprived of Liberty and the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. Tragic as it may be, but we have found out that governments who are using diversion and non-custodial measures are were better prepared to handle the pandemic, and were able to release 45,000 children from detention. We also rely on UNICEF's experience and promising practices from our field presence in over 150 countries, where we help support governments as well as civil society organizations and children themselves on Justice for Children programming. The Reimagine Justice for Agenda sets 6 priority actions for child protection programming, which enable us to accelerate progress over the next 10 years and are interconnected and are very much aligned with the 4 levers, and they mutually reinforce each other. This agenda reinforces states' accountability for the human rights of children. Like Ambassador Ray was mentioning, all the good things that Canada is doing, and especially emphasizing that it also involves the social programming for children, the social programs. He emphasized the prevention aspect, which is very much part of the Reimagine Justice agenda and the levers of action in the agenda for action. Again, but it also recognizes the important role we play, our individual accountability. Earlier on, our friends from Baker McKenzie were saying the role they played in bringing to action, bringing suits to give voices to children and providing legal aid and legal empowerment to children. It emphasizes that not only states, but civil society, children themselves, and law professionals, pro bono law firms like Baker McKenzie and all other law firms who are engaging in pro bono and giving voices to our young people and to the causes of the rights of children, have individual accountability to drive progress and achieve the much needed justice reform. It also addresses and is committed to addressing discrimination in child justice systems. Earlier on, Ambassador Ray said that because of the data, because of the evidence in Canada, they were able to pinpoint that Black children, Indigenous children are actually left behind, no, in the reform for justice. And because of this data, they can now provide more targeted programming for these children and ensure that no child is really left behind. So we are asking that there be also focus on children with disabilities. In fact, the CRC general comment said that children with disabilities should not be in the justice system. But unfortunately, many states cannot detect those children. And we have found out earlier on, Cedric and all the organizers there had a forum on brain sciences. And we know that many evidence says, according to 7,000 literature in the global study and our friends doing the health chapter of the UN Global Study, many of these children who enter the justice system actually suffer from disabilities. So we must make sure that we can detect and have programs for them before they enter the justice system. Indigenous and ethnic children discriminated due to their gender and identity and sexual orientation, and also children on the move. And we are very clear on that, that children on the move should never, ever be placed in detention nor deprived of liberty. The Reimagine agenda calls that every child can know and claim their rights. Again, this is the first pillar of the lever for action. But also, aside from child participation, we must legally empower these children. Coincidentally, the Legal Empowerment Fund is there. What are we trying to say? There are 4 strategies to legal empowerment. First, there must be education. There must be mechanisms for expression, but there must also be safety and access to remedy for children and young people. The Children in Environmental Justice has shown this path, that they can really ask for justice if they are given and empowered about their rights. But also we must make sure that there are no backlash when children express these rights, especially in societies or governments where the tendency, where the danger to their lives can be also present. So we must make sure that all 4 are there. Smarter financing, again, the new child protection strategy and our child protection system strengthening focuses on legal and policy framework, but also governance and coordination structures, both horizontal and vertical, especially for governments that are decentralized, making sure that their child ombudsman, national human rights institutes really are independent and can protect the voices of children, making sure that we partner with social service workforce, with the health sector, especially on mental health, as the ambassador of Mexico has mentioned, and also the social programs that Ambassador Ray mentioned. Only then can we really make sure that children are prevented from entering the justice system. There is no magic solution, but already the governments of Canada, Mexico, and Belgium, and many other governments have shown what it takes to make sure that no child is deprived of liberty, and also they have access to justice. In fact, in 2020, we can happily share that in the implementation of Reimagine Justice agenda in 123 countries, 200,186 children in conflict with the law were subjected to a diversion or non-custodial measures. Last night, we were just talking to our colleagues in Lebanon. They said that they were able to release 46% of the children from detention. Also, we were able to ensure that child rights and child in the justice system is very much part of the Secretary General Rule of Law Vision, and also the Secretary General Guidance Note on Transitional Justice. And we're very happy to our excellencies present here today that they will make sure that child in the justice system will be very much part of our justice, of our high-level political forum and SDG Summit. So I'm very hopeful that despite the data that we have still many children deprived of liberty, we will be able to achieve our SDG goal, SDG 20 in 2030. But allow me to end with what our former executive director said during the launch of our Reimagine Justice agenda. She said that any child detained is an evidence of a failed system. And that failure is even compounded further if the justice system, if the child protection system meant to protect and support the children, add to their suffering. We must work to end the detention of children and ensure that all children will have access to justice. Thank you.
thank you, Mrs. Grace, for introducing the levers of Agenda for Action. Actually, spoiler alert, we have a video from our colleagues about the 4 levers of Agenda for Action too. So, Ilya, I would like to give the floor to Jennifer.
Thank you. Grace, thank you so much. And we're really delighted now to move on to our next speaker. Tatiana Teplova is the head of policy coherence on SDGs and the senior justice counselor for public governance directorate at the OECD, and a real friend to the Justice for All agenda. Delighted to have you with us again, Dr. Tatiana Teplova, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and good afternoon to all of you, Ambassador Ray, all colleagues present there in person and online. I genuinely wish I could have been there with you, but I hope that there will be other opportunities. I really would like to thank you for inviting the OECD to join this important conversation, and I also would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to the Pathfinders and all of the partners for organizing this event and actually advancing this extremely important conversation on justice for all, and in particular for children. And as was mentioned by the ambassador and of course by the organizers, as we reach the midpoint of the Agenda 2030, it really is timely and necessary to reassess our approaches on how we can further strengthen our efforts to realize the goals that have been set in the SDG16 to achieve justice for all, including justice for children. And here we are driven by the quote from Nelson Mandela that as long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest. And here for children, this means that we must indeed leave no one behind and ensure that every child, regardless of their circumstances, has equal access to justice and a chance to thrive. And so if we reflect on why this is imperative to strengthen access to justice for children, first of all, the evidence, including the OECD evidence, reveals that there is a profound interrelation between access to justice, peace, and development. And we are all aware of the alarming data from our partners in the World Justice Project, which shows that billions of people lack access to justice. And among these staggering numbers, what we see is that children bear a significant burden, particularly that nearly every third person on this planet, in this world, is a child. And what we also learned from the OECD research at the country level, for instance, in our country work in Latvia, that nearly every third child experiences some form of a legal problem, whether they recognize it or not, that this is a legal problem. So it just shows you the scope of the issue and the importance to act. And this is broadly in line with the overall legal needs research that confirms that vulnerable populations, including children, are particularly exposed to legal problems. When we look at the types of legal issues that can be faced by children, we can think about family law disputes, exposure to violence, abuse, gender-based discrimination, child labor, child marriage, and dealing with these issues can indeed act as a catalyst for improving child's lives, but also bolstering the achievement of all of the SDGs. So here we also really need to recognize the challenges that are faced by children when dealing or entering in some form the justice systems. Of course, these are well known, but it might be worth repeating some of them. This can range from children's limited awareness and understanding of the complex legal processes and terminologies to the lack lack of adequate support systems, including legal representation and child-friendly services, to the service structure that sometimes can promote re-victimization of children who experience violence, but also to discrimination and stigma that can be found in many justice systems that can disproportionately affect particularly marginalized children. And Ambassador Ray talked about these children that can lead to unequal treatment and barriers to justice. So how can we as a global community, as policymakers, try to overcome these challenges and fortify children's access to justice? To answer this question, at least partly, we at the OECD have been working with many partners around the world, including many of you who are present in the room and online, to develop what we call an OECD Child-Friendly Justice Framework, which is set to be published later this summer. So this framework is built on 4 pillars and a foundation, and aims to support all of the countries that would like to deliver enhanced access to justice for children. It's also in line with the new OECD standard on access to justice and people-centered justice systems, which was adopted by the OECD Council just yesterday, and which aims to promote access to justice for all, including children. So let me just briefly provide an overview of the key elements of the framework. So it really starts with the foundation of a political commitment and a justice system culture that genuinely centers around the needs of children. It demands placing children at the core of relevant aspects of the justice systems, but also committing to a culture of child-friendliness. And here we can be looking at countries like Sweden that have demonstrated exemplary commitments by adopting legislation that places children at the heart of justice systems. Then, of course, when it comes to the individual pillars in this framework, the first pillar focuses on the importance of delivering tailored, inclusive, and appropriate child-friendly services that are grounded in a comprehensive understanding of the legal needs of children from their own perspective. So meaning that we need to understand how children experience those legal needs, whether again they themselves understand that these are legal needs or not. And here I just would like to highlight that the OECD has developed legal needs survey module specifically focusing on understanding the needs of children and young people, which aims to provide an empirical tool to support all of the policymakers, planners, statisticians to understand what it actually means to experience legal needs from a child's perspective, but also then to have a justice journey to be dealing with those needs. And then when it comes to services, again, if from the OECD perspective, we'd like to highlight some of the promising examples. One example that comes to mind is from New Zealand that has genuinely, seems to have genuinely embraced innovative measures such as the youth courts, where judges and professionals receive a specialized training to understand and to respond to the unique needs of children. And these courts also aim to provide age-appropriate language support and guidance within safe and welcoming environments. In terms of the other pillars, let me briefly highlight, and Jennifer, please feel free to stop me if I'm going over the time.
We'd love to hear the brief pillars would be great, Tatiana,
All
but
right.
just very brief. Thank you.
With pleasure. So the next pillar really concerns the practical aspects of the implementation. So what we refer to at the OECD as governance enablers. And here, based on our country work and the experience, we see that insufficient collaboration across agencies, across services can impede the effective implementation of child-friendly justice approaches. And here, the pillar encompasses a wide range of elements, including coordination mechanisms, establishing partnerships, and of course, this is one of the core pillars of the approach proposed and promoted by the pathfinders that indeed embraces a holistic approach that spans society, state, and overall justice systems. And here, what is important is to consider the need for these mechanisms both at the policy level, but also at the service delivery level on the ground for various institutions such as social protection, police, prosecution, and courts. And there are some countries such as Norway that are actually making such quite an impressive progress in this regard. Briefly, the third pillar of the framework emphasizes the empowerment of children. And here we are talking about the empowerment of children to participate in justice processes, but then this should be accompanied by the empowerment of justice system professionals, as their involvement is really paramount to enable children to assert their rights. And here I'm really pleased to report, Ambassador Ray, that Canada indeed has embraced quite a few innovative measures to empower children, including through the provision of child-friendly information, support persons, as well as many special measures during court proceedings. And perhaps lastly, I'd like to emphasize the final pillar of the framework that looks at the importance of planning and monitoring of child-friendly policies that should be based on robust, disaggregated data to foster evidence-based policymaking. And here I also would like to emphasize that to achieve this, we need to have effective accountability mechanisms in order to assess progress and to ensure that public actions indeed effectively targets the justice gap. And perhaps in terms of the good examples to mention countries like Australia that have been looking to establish comprehensive data collection systems, including child disaggregated data, to monitor and evaluate justice interventions that can provide a promising example. So before concluding, I just wish to underscore that, of course, the OECD stands ready to support all countries to accelerate progress on the SDG16 for the sake of children, building on our policy dialogue, multidisciplinary analysis. We are genuinely committed to be working together with all of the countries and our partners, such as the pathfinders, to ensure that we leave no one behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Tatiana, really helpful. And that theme of evidence and disaggregated data and be able to monitor through that is really coming through across all of our sessions, I think, and also just to reinforce the importance of recognizing the social realities that underpin so many of these circumstances for children. And it's very exciting to hear about the child-friendly justice framework that the OECD is coming out with at the end of this year. So I think that will be very helpful in many ways. Thank you for spending time with us to share that with us. Just before we conclude this session, I'm pleased to hand the floor to Osish, who will take us through very briefly the work of the Participation Task Force and the results of that very recently. So over to you, Osish.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Tatiana. So now I would like to introduce you to my colleagues, Januka from Nepal and Dhruv from India, and show a small video about the 4 levers of Agenda for Action. So, yep, there are so many screens, you can watch any of them.
Justice for children is key to people-centered justice and justice for all. Welcome to our video on the 4 strategic levers of justice reform, focusing on the importance of ensuring justice for children.
Building new partnerships with children and young people needs much more than simply communicating information and promoting child participation. To us, it means forging long-term partnerships with children from diverse backgrounds and providing safe spaces for minority participants. It means investing in systematic feedback loops that actively involve children in influencing and ratifying policies. And importantly, it means being accountable at every step to connect and co-create for and with children.
Investing wisely in children's well-being is key to achieving justice for all. By prioritizing children's needs, we not only secure justice, but also foster a society where everyone thrives. With proper education and information, children have great potential to help make smarter financial decisions. To strengthen political support and create incentives for reform, we should systematically highlight the positive impacts of investing in children. Hence, we call to embrace child-centered approaches in national strategies and budget allocation.
As young people and children, we believe that people-centered justice is only possible when policies are informed by our lived experiences. Our ask is therefore simple: data collection through a mix of qualitative and quantitative research that recognizes under 18s as a distinct demographic group, but also takes into account differences amongst children such as gender, disability, and ethnicity. Inclusivity is central to our vision of child-friendly justice systems, and disaggregated data is the way to go.
In recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the need to safeguard digital justice innovations, particularly when it comes to children. To ensure that children have improved access to justice in the digital space, it is crucial to involve them in the digital design and develop child-centered procedural safeguards. We should identify and address the unique challenges faced by children and prioritize to reach the most marginalized group first, ensuring that no child is left behind.
Children and young people worldwide are co-creating policy briefs and toolkits for decision makers and young people alike. Check out our work to learn about best practices, justice system reforms, and fun activities to ensure justice for children, justice for all.
Can I just say that was my first time seeing that video, and Januka and Dhruv, who weren't able to be here with us despite the funding that was available by the Legal Empowerment Fund, that have been participating in that way by creating the video to share with you about the work that that we're doing together. So well done to Januka and Dhruv, and thank you so much to them. And sorry to interrupt, Osish, please jump in.
That's fine, Jennifer. Thank you so much, Dhruv and Januka, for working so hard on this video.
Competition she took part.
It really, I think it really get the message about the 4 levers of Agenda for Action. So without ado, I would love to get your attention because we are officially launching the policy brief for building new partnerships, which you can scan here on the pink. Oh yeah, you can get it in the screen, you can scan it. And yes, it has key messages such as shift the paradigm from children's participation to partnerships with children, respect and promote children's right to be heard, especially those in contact with justice systems, invest in systematic feedback loops between all institutions and stakeholders based on children's lived realities, enable a continuum of accountability at all levels to uphold access to justice for all children. So it has been created by collaborating with a large group of children and young people like me and my other colleagues. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'm so pleased to have such a rich contribution from everyone. I would just like to take a moment to say thank you to my co-moderator, Osish, and also to Ambassador Ray and to Ambassador Massieu, who had to leave, I realize, and to Fisette and Grace and Tatiana. Such a delight to have such a rich conversation. And can I ask you to share your appreciation with our colleagues one last time before we take a short break? So we will take a short break. There's coffee and refreshments in the corridor. If you want to just grab those and bring them back in, we're going to move into our next session. And thank you again.
And welcome back after this short break. I hope the watery coffee gave you some energy. I'm not used to Americano, so it's a little bit not strong enough for me. So we have now the second roundtable, which is about speaking with our partners, our colleagues from the US, about the different levers that we heard about before from Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer, to introduce them with Osish. And now to get the information a little bit, what does it mean at national level? So I've got three wonderful professionals work at the table with me. And as Jennifer said, you know, those levers are very important in terms of justice to foster justice reform, and they're clearly transversal. So you remember before I told you that we've been doing organizing those world congresses as a global brainstorm on child justice, right? So just wanted to tell you that from the last World Congress in 2021, we developed 5 priorities, and you will see that they're totally linked with the 4 levers that have been presented by Jennifer. So 5 priorities until the next World Congress. And you will find them in some of the activities that we've been speaking about. The first one is on digital justice, in particular, in the world of post-COVID, the role of virtual court, and what are the procedural safeguards for children in those virtual courts, with a strong interest as well on the new development regarding to predictive justice. The other priority is on justice in time of crisis, which include, of course, pandemic, unfortunately, war, and what I called the climate injustice for children, which is actually a strong element of the international agenda nowadays. The third one is community empowerment, with an important topic on child-friendly police, access to justice for LGBTQI+ children, and what we call generally legal pluralism, which include religious justice and traditional justice, etc. The fourth one, which was a priority that been focused on a lot during the last World Congress, was on the child justice through neurosciences, and in particular, all traumatic brain injuries are recognized in sentencing, which is a very interesting topic, which is, I think, a little bit more developed in the US than in Europe. So we have a lot to learn from you guys. And the last one, which is a topic that we've been working a lot recently, and in particular with our colleague Najat, it's ending child detention by promoting community-based measure and sanction, in particular as a follow-up on the global study on children deprived of liberty. So now we're going to have 2 elements in this discussion. We're going to check those levers at national level, but before that, I wanted to give the floor to Najat. Najat Majib is the special representative of the UN Secretary General on Violence Against Children. She is our motors in child justice, and not only on a global aspect. We understood well on the global aspect around children rights, and I wanted you perhaps to give you some introductory word to this session. Thank you.
It's working. Okay. Many thanks, and sorry for disturbing, your agenda. I will be brief. Just to let you know that I am really, thank you, Cedric, Excellencies, dear participant, I am really happy, and dear Osish, that I saw this morning, and I had a wonderful discussion with him. I'm really very pleased to be part of this panel today. And with, Jennifer and Cedric, we were fighting for, it's not working?
Push it down a little bit closer.
Yeah.
Okay, it's better here? Okay, thank you. You can shout.
Yeah.
I just want really to share with you some key points regarding, accelerating SDG16 and 16 is one of the cross pillar SDGs that you know better than me. And regarding my mandate, since the beginning of my process, you know, it's not only about SDG 16.2, it's really interlinking the all 17 SDGs, because you cannot achieve. And it's really important, and I heard some remark when I write, justice as we understand it, penal, civil, administrative is important, but without social and without climate justice is not working. So it's really, really important to take into account that. And I just want to we are less than 7 years currently, and we are lagging behind. To date, we are lagging behind. And it is really, really, and it is why I appreciate that justice for children is very timely and really much needed. I just want to let you know that you have millions of children worldwide that are in poverty. We never reach this. Millions of children, and the number is crazy, who are hugely displaced due to climate crisis, due to conflicts. Millions of children are victims of various forms of violence, even the harmful traditional practices. Millions of children are really enrolled in criminal gang and in violent extremist group. And what we are seeing also is that we have more and more children who are due to risky survival activities because they are on streets, because they are trying to survive. And also more and more children, because they have some behavioral attitude, are really probably falling into the justice system. And we are seeing more and more children for petty offenses that are also dealt by the juvenile system. And many of them are deprived of liberty because they are migrants, because they are claiming their rights, because they are peacefully protesting, because they are expressing themselves, you know, on social media. And I think here we need to be very careful regarding that. And I just want to share with you, I'm not reading my statement, I just want to share with you regarding, you know, the feedback I had during all this my country visit. What I am seeing when I am meeting law enforcement and justice and judge and lawyers, what appears that they are more and more dealing with social problem, behavioral problem, cyberbullying, the problem on internet, and they are not really, it's not their role. And why it's important here is really to strengthen the justice system. But if justice system is not strengthened as well as, and at the same time, as social system, as educational system, and also as health system is not going to work, including social protection. And I think it's really, really important to take it into account. The other thing that I want to highlight very, very quickly, and it will be my last point, is really we cannot build, and I heard about digital innovation, and we saw it increasing, you know, to reach the most vulnerable, and it was highlighted. Okay, it's needed, but we have to be very careful also to make sure that it's about child safeguarding. This is important, taking into account the digital divide, but also to make sure that it's not going to replace all this face-to-face and to delay all the procedure. I think what is important to mix the both. And this really, and the last but not the least, is really the legal empowerment of, you know, children and communities to seek, to know the law, but also to seek redress. Because we have a big problem, and we were discussing this morning with Osish, and I want to congratulate you for the data. But data is not only about how many children have access to justice, but I think it's important how we are assessing this data. Because what is important, and we saw it in many countries, children victims of some forms of violence are reporting to law enforcement. But the delay between the law enforcement intervention and the justice could take years. I think it's important also to use the data and the delay to assess the system, how it's working. And the last but not the least is really children as part of the solution. This, it's my mantra since I started, because I learned a lot from them, and they are the experts. They know where the system is failing, and they know what is working. And I'm really happy to see that they are here. And I want to congratulate them. I want to congratulate my two friends, Jennifer, Cedric, and also you and NDC who is not present today, because of all the work you did and your roadmap and what you are doing. I think we have guidance. Currently, what we need to do is how we can switch to make sure that we make change where children are living and they are not living here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Najat, and I appreciate that you try to give us more work. So now that we did the paper, we need to work on it, but we will do so. But you say something that we all believe in: children are part of the solution, and is actually the topic of the first lever, which is building new partnership, including intergenerational network. I wanted to introduce you, our first speaker, Dawn Mitchell. You are a chief attorney of the juvenile rights practice at the Legal Aid Society in New York City. And Dawn, when I was reading your biography, I could not believe the number of cases you are representing every year. More than 30,000 children in New York City Family Court for neglect, juvenile justice, abuse, etc. And you manage a small team of more or less 300 staff attorneys. So the first question will be how you manage that, of course. But the real one is about your own as professional, your own experience, and your organization as well experience about building those partnerships with children and young people. And perhaps if you can share with us some lesson learned. Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon. It's an honor to be a part of this gathering and to talk about children and the rights of children and their access to justice. I like to share initially that my connection to this work is really profound, coming from a place of having grown up in inner city Philadelphia and being a person who endured many hardships, but had access to folks who took the time to lead me and to guide me and to bring me into understanding advocacy and the road of advocacy and how it builds for better tomorrows. And so that's sort of where I started in this work. And I have a group of amazing staff who really do stay connected to that mission. One of the things that we've learned over time is that we can't do this work well without our clients leading the work. So when I started in this field, I thought I had all the answers. It wasn't until years into my work that I began to really listen to children in the communities, not inside the courthouse where we're dealing with crisis, but inside the communities. And as you talk about the social issues that young people deal with and their families deal with, I really was driving them into the courts. And so the courts is sort of a last resort. It's a place we don't want. I mean, if I could work my way out of business, I'd like to do that. And in fact, in New York State and in New York City in particular, far less children are involved in the systems of juvenile justice and child welfare than in history of the city. But that has now come at a time when we all recognize that the partnership with children and families with lived experiences is critical to how we design policy and how we implement policy. So even in a legal practice, there's a traditional relationship that we have with our clients who are children. We do what's called direct representation. So that was the beginning of a change where it's not about what the adults think is best, but it's really about hearing the voices of the clients that we serve and then reaching beyond, allowing them to define the win. Creating what we call advisory boards was one of the first steps. So it's not a traditional structure for law firms to have advisory boards, but in fact, we've learned that it's essential to how best we serve our clients. So across this country, there are advisory boards now situated and affiliated with government agencies, as well as some of the smaller organizations. I say small, like legal aid. We have our advisory group. Funding for those type of partnerships is critical. We have to find that funding to engage youth, to incentivize their engagement, but also support their engagement. And that's something that we've prioritized. And now in New York State, it's really going to be a part of the regular routine practice in all of the attorneys for children practices across the state. We've asked for the funding to come from the state and from the counties, and that's where we found it great success. Our community justice units now have a place in every community, and I'm speaking specifically about New York City. So one of the things that we looked at was crime, gun violence, gang violence, the incidence of children being removed from schools and then placed into juvenile justice systems. So we looked at that, and we found that to interrupt that behavior and those incidents of connections with law enforcement, we had to be out in the community, not at the courthouse where the kids were showing up after arrest. And so we have community justice units now that have staffing of what we call organizers, who are children and young adults with lived experiences. And we've partnered with grassroots organizations that are all across the city in every borough that are actually supporting interruption of violence in their own communities. So we're allowing the young people to define for us what that roadmap needs to look like. At the same time, they're not just giving to us, we are also supporting every effort that they've identified needs to be supported. So whether that's policy and legislation, having our clients side by side with us at our state capitol to present hearings. In fact, I had a client just recently present at a hearing held by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, to talk about the disruption of families and what it does to children who come from Black families. We found this, you heard earlier, this I hear it's in Canada, over representation of Black families in these systems, and we have the same issue here. And so one of the things that we are starting to do and work with U.S. government on is just making sure that our clients are actually expressing what the issue is, how it impacts them directly. And for the first time, this hearing was held where young people could actually speak on this issue of disruption of their families' lives because of government interruption. So where the government wants to focus on well-being and create policies that focus on well-being, the government has also been I guess I would say that one of the biggest contributors to harm. And our clients are talking about that. And they're really imploring upon government officials and policy leaders and lawyers and judges in our courthouses to listen to those voices. So through community partnerships, grassroots partnerships, in communities where those organizations believe in empowering themselves, we are now partnering with them to design our policy agenda and priorities, as well as to design their strategy on defense in the cases where we do have to go forward in some court forum. So this is something that is growing across this country in terms of the advisory boards now becoming I'm on the board of the National Association for Counsel for Children, and our advisory board is representative of young adults who've been in child welfare systems. Child welfare systems are the systems that remove children from their households because of neglect or abuse. But what we've learned is that the driver to removal of children from their families is poverty. And having the young adults a part of the advisory group and now a part of our board is essential to how we are moving forward with a national agenda. One of the first things that they are helping us to lead is to ensure that every child has the right to counsel. That's something that might seem odd, but that kids who are being pulled and their liberties are taken are not provided with counsel, but that is that's the truth in many parts of this country. It is not the fact in New York. However, understanding that we've learned a lot from what we have here in New York, it's important in New York and California, some of our, I would say, liberal states that guarantee the right to counsel. It's important that every child across this country have counsel, and our youth advisory council for the National Association for Counsel of Children is actually leading that charge and has really supported and uplifted that mandate. So again, you working with young people who have lived experiences, working in the communities with grassroots organizations that are empowering their neighbors, their communities is essential to really ensuring access to justice for all young people. And in fact, our court systems are now, especially because of the pandemic, as a result of the pandemic, look to us to really guide them on structures outside of the court to support young people and families. And hubs were created, for example, as a result of young people and families saying they had no ability to really access the court. So there's a significant amount of reform that can happen with the support of community partnerships. And there's a significant amount of participation that still needs to be cultivated. But certainly it is vitally important that young people with lived experiences who are being impacted by the system help us to guide and create the pathway for change.
Thank you very much, Dawn. I mean, that is, for us, it's a clear example of what we've been speaking since many days now that we are in New York on child participation, but from the concrete level. So meaning like you incorporate children actually where you deliver the services, which is extremely important. But as you say, to advocate for a better tomorrow, you need to think about the finance aspect. So is where I'm going to turn with you, Stephanie, to speak perhaps on the level number 2 on developing strategy for finance, for smarter financing. So Stephanie, I present you, you're a senior staff attorney at Children's Rights. Children's Rights is a national advocacy organization that champions the legal rights of children impacted by a government system, which is extremely interesting. You will tell us a little bit more about that. And you're more in charge of class action litigation or strategic litigation to look for systemic change. So the question for you is about, as you understood, about the smarter financing and what can we do to develop strategy in terms of investment to support better child justice. And perhaps if you have some concrete example on where any investment on child well-being or inclusion has saved money to the full society, a way that we can speak to our politicians. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm very happy to be here. And I was very happy to be asked to speak about this lever 2 of smarter financing, in part because in the work that I do, often I'm dealing with what happens when we don't make smart investments in our children. And as Cedric introduced, I'm primarily a litigator and I work in government systems that impact children. So those include systems like the child welfare system, the juvenile criminal system, and also the Medicaid system, which for our non-US audience is our public health insurance program for low-income adults and children. And those all sound like public programs that should be working towards justice for children, that should be working towards children's well-being. But unfortunately, too often that's not the case in our government systems here in the US. And when we're looking at these in the context of SDG16, which is access to justice, particularly in the context of sustainable development, I think we really need to be talking about these in a holistic way. And Ambassador Ray introduced this earlier in terms of talking about not only access to criminal justice, but also access to economic justice and social justice. And we need to be talking about this across government systems. So how do these 3 systems, for example, interact? And I know with our clients, we often see that children move between these systems. So when you don't have, for example, access to medical care, particularly access to community-based mental health services, at the front end of a system, you see increased need and increased rates of children entering systems like the child welfare system and like the criminal justice system. And once you have children in, for example, the child welfare system, they're more likely to then enter the criminal justice system. So there's tremendous overlap and cycling between those services, and we know that they're all interconnected. And I actually want to focus much of my time today talking about our child protection system, or what we call in the US the child welfare system, and that Dawn touched on a little bit earlier. And that's because that's a system that we often think of as a system where we are making smart investments in children, where we're making investments in child well-being. And too often in the US, that's not the case. And we think of that as a system where we are investing in protecting children from abuse. And in fact, the majority of children in the United States enter the child welfare system not because of an allegation of abuse, but because of an allegation of neglect. And the reasons that someone might come into the child welfare system because of neglect include things like lack of access to adequate housing, parents having unstable housing or being homeless, lack of access to adequate nutrition, lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to adequate supervision. And as Dawn pointed out earlier, these are all factors that have to do with conditions of poverty, not with factors of abuse. And we know, unfortunately, that when children come into the child welfare system, their rates of well-being drop across the board. So just to give you a few statistics or ideas, children who come into the child welfare system are 3 times less likely to graduate from high school. They're 6 times less likely to graduate from a 4-year university. Their rates of homelessness increase dramatically. In fact, when we look at the homeless youth population in the United States, over half of the homeless youth population has had some child welfare involvement. When we look at when we look at the relationship between children that are in the child welfare system and the criminal justice system, over a quarter of youth that leave the child welfare system end up in the juvenile or adult criminal systems within 2 years of leaving that system. So these are not rates where we're increasing child well-being, we're really failing children coming into this system. And just to remind you again, that statistics from the beginning, the majority of children entering the system are not entering for child abuse. They're entering actually for conditions related to poverty. So this is not a system where we're making smart investments in children, to go back to this lever 2. And I also want to talk about the fact that this is not a system where those harms are applied equally. It's a system, and Ambassador Ray again talked about this in the Canadian context, but very true in the US context as well, where Black and Indigenous children are disproportionately harmed across the board. So Black and Indigenous children are more likely to be investigated. They're more likely to be screened into the child welfare system. They're more likely to be removed from their parents, and they're more likely to be put, for example, in harmful congregate settings. And one shocking statistic in the US is that over 50% of Black children, all Black children in the United States, will be investigated by the child welfare system at some point in their life before they turn 18. So this is, again, disproportionate harms for particular populations in the United States. So the stakes are high in terms of child well-being, but we are continuing to pour money into a system, aka a child protection system, where we know, looking at this data, that we are not providing for children's well-being. The child welfare system in the United States is a $30 billion a year industry. And I use that term industry deliberately because it's a system that is often operated by for-profit corporations in the United States. So it is an industry. And we could be using that money to redirect it towards systems that actually provide for child well-being, systems like housing, healthcare, nutrition, and education. The harms associated with this system and the disproportionate harms on Black and Indigenous children are starting to be recognized by key decision makers. President Biden acknowledged in April 2021, and I'm quoting here, "Too many children are removed from loving homes because poverty is often conflated with neglect. And the enduring effects of systemic racism and economic barriers means that families of color are disproportionately affected." Last year, the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the CERD committee, specifically called out the United States in terms of the racial discrimination in our child welfare system, and asked that the United States take all appropriate measures to end racial discrimination in child welfare, particularly looking at federal laws and policies and how we can amend or repeal laws and policies that have that effect. We do know that when there is political will for appropriate investment in children, the results speak to themselves. And you asked about some examples where we know that the funding has had good effects. So in 2021, for example, the US Congress expanded the child tax credit which was providing direct financial support for families. And the result was that child poverty rate fell by nearly half to its lowest recorded level. 3 million children were brought above the poverty line. And there's increasing research, very exciting research going on right now that's showing what families spent that money on. And they spent it on things like housing, childcare, education, medical needs. And child maltreatment rates dropped because of this spending, and child well-being metrics rose across the board. And yet in 2022, Congress voted on whether or not to renew the program. And unfortunately, it was not re-upped, and millions of children fell back below the poverty line. So we know where the spending is effective, and yet there's not political will for this. And I want to re-emphasize something Dawn said as well, going back to where we need to be directed in our spending, which is we need to be directed not only by the data, and I think some of the data I talked about shows how we're spending, again, $30 billion in an industry we know it's not well spent, but we also need to be directed directly by children and families, people with lived experience in terms of where that money can be effectively used. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for this snapshot of the situation. At the end, it's all about fairness of the care system and the justice system, and all the challenges to ensure this fairness. But nowadays we have new challenges, above all following the COVID pandemic and the use of new technologies. So it brings me to you, Amy, on the level number 4 on scaling up justice innovation. So. Amy, you're a senior youth police strategist from the Goal Center. So for those who don't know the Goal Center, it's an organization which tries to understand better and improve the delivery of youth defense services in every state in the US. And we've been working together on topics like this one, digital justice. So the question for you would be, Amy, to understand a little bit what is your and your organization position concerning digital justice, in particular the use of remote hearing and the consequences, above all, of remote hearing in sentencing.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much for inviting us. I so appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. It also is such an incredible opportunity for me to look at our work through a new lens. So we did a study a few years ago in the height of the pandemic. We interviewed 50 plus youth defenders from across the country from 38 states. And we talked to them about the experiences that they were having and that their clients were having when courts moved very quickly from in-person hearings to remote hearings during the COVID pandemic. And so, you know, we've just been in our little US bubble doing that work. And so looking at that work through the lens of this lever 4 has been very enlightening for us as well. And so I appreciate that opportunity. What I like about lever 4 is that it says that this increase on technology we can't do uncritically. And I think that not only can we can't adopt it uncritically, but the analysis that we do when we're looking at new technologies has to be through the lens of the children who experience the system. So as we all know, courts' reliance on technology exploded during the pandemic. It made sense. It wasn't physically safe to have in-person hearings anymore. But what we found when we were talking to defenders a few years ago has come to pass, which is they were concerned that the convenience of video hearings was going to last beyond the end of the pandemic. And that is true across the US. There are places where courts have largely returned to in-person hearings. That's a good thing. There are places that largely have not. And what we are finding is that they are choosing not to return to in-person hearings, not because of public health concerns, but because of convenience. And it's not the convenience of the children. It's not even, sometimes they tout the convenience of the families, but really it's about the convenience of the adults who run the system. And as I was looking at our work, and again, through this new lens, which I'm grateful for, that's what it really boiled down to for me, was that we create these systems supposedly to serve children. but then we tweak the systems not to benefit children, but to benefit the adults who run the systems. And I think that video hearings coming out of COVID are a perfect example of that. So just to give you an example of how I'm skeptical about the push for convenience. So I've done most of my work before I went to the Galt Center in the state of Ohio, which is where I've lived my whole life. And we do arraignments or first hearings in court. And to show you how we dehumanize people in court, we call them cattle calls, which is we set all the arraignments at 9 a.m. And you have to be at court at 9 a.m. If there are only 3 or 4 cases, great. You might get out in a couple hours. If it's been a big weekend and there's 40 or 50 or 100 cases, a child and their parent is going to sit in court the entire day. And we were advocating to reform that for years and years and years. And courts never cared about the convenience of the child or family. But then here comes COVID, technology makes it easier for the adults who work in the court system, and suddenly convenience is a reason that they're going to make changes. So I also want to make sure that we talk about, and again, a lot of folks have talked about this, the digital divide and the racial inequities that happen, right? So not everybody has access to the technology needed to fully engage in remote court hearings. And that is because of systemic disinvestment in communities. It is particularly Black and Brown communities, just like all the other disinvestment that we've talked about throughout the day. When we interviewed the attorneys from across the country asking about how the COVID hearings were going, one of them summarized it, and I think in a very important way, and said, the entire workaround for in-person hearings presupposes a position of privilege. So you presuppose that a child has internet access, has a device, has the software, has the know-how to even be able to join. So technology has been adopted in other ways, obviously. One that comes to mind that I think also implicates rights in ways that we didn't think about first is the use of electronic monitors. And I don't know if this is a US unique thing or not, but what we do is we agree to release children from detention, but we put an ankle monitor on them and we track their movement. And at first it seems great, right? Okay, because at least they're not in detention. But it really implicates their rights and their freedoms in ways that are very harmful. And finally, the electronic monitors and the video conferencing technology, and other folks have talked about this too, brings in for-profit businesses into the legal system in potentially dangerous ways. And again, this it further pushes children's rights and needs to the back seat, because now we have companies who have shareholders who care about profit. And so when we try to roll back some of these changes, suddenly we're not just talking about what's in the best interest of the children, what's a good investment. We have shareholders who care what we're doing in the legal system. In the US, children have a recognized constitutional right to appear in the courtroom. And it has to be the child's choice whether to agree not to appear in person. They need an attorney, in our opinion, a defense attorney who is specialized in defending children, to educate them so that they can make the right decision about whether they want to appear in court or not. And so, like Dawn was talking about, it's the expressed interest of the child that our attorneys are charged with advocating for in the courtroom. And so I want to wrap up by saying that it's the child's expressed needs and wants that also need to be driving the adoption of any technology in the juvenile legal system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I think it's a mix between this kind of tendency to techno-solutionism. Technology will save everything and we find a solution to everything. And then the best interest, not of the child, but the legal professional, right? But thank you for your comments. Najat, it's not in the program, but I know you will need to leave. I was wondering if which homework are you going to bring back to the office now?
Oh my God. since this morning. You know, I have a big basket. And no, but just I am hearing what you are telling. And we discussed this morning because it starts very soon. We have to be very careful, you know, when we are speaking about investing, you know, in children, it makes economic sense, sure, but we need to see on what we invest. And I think we have to be very careful to have this siloed approach, to have this wonderful justice system when we know that we can prevent children for being, you know, front of the justice system because of poverty, because of discrimination, because of lack of education, because of racism, because of the business sector, my God, and US is one a big example, you know, the social sector really has to be, you know, public and in lines. I think it's very, very important. The other thing I am hearing today, it's really, and I am seeing it, it's the number of children who are between, you know, they are not in educational system, they are not in justice system, they are not in welfare system, and they are spending time between all these things. And it's crazy. And very frankly, the human cost is huge and the economic cost is huge. And the last but not the least is when we start speaking about, you know, all the ICT sector that will resolve all the problem. Yes, it's important to use it, but we have to be very careful. It's about right to privacy. It's about right to protection. And we need to make sure that inform. And US is one of the big states fighting, you know, all the crime online, but in the same time, making children that could be exposed. And I think we have to be very careful. And the last point, I have a lot of last points. I think it's also, you know, empowering. And I love what you are doing. It's really empowering because we need to create a counterpower. People need to know what are the legislation, what are the rights, and I was listening to you, and really I think the problem is not, you know, this is a question, you know, it's not only, I visit many countries, low income countries, when I saw most better, you know, social welfare services than in the rich countries. And it's making me having many concerns. I am living here since 4 years, and I can tell you that I become crazy regarding all this discrimination. And because I think we can make, and what I can commit to do as special representative on violence against children and following, you know, the global study on children deprived of liberty, following the SDGs implementation, and we'll be very happy really to work with you to advocate more and to show that justice is not things that it's not a game. It's a right. And it's not only a right, because if they want to have more, you know, less violence, more safety, I think we need to make sure that children, when they are facing all the system, they are not facing violence and rejection and discrimination, because we are paying a high tribute and the society will pay. This is what I'm bringing back with me.
Thank you very much, Najat. Since you're leaving, perhaps if there is one, thank you. If there is one or two questions in the room, there. One question in the back. You might need a micro for those people online, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the speakers. It's been fascinating listening to you all. My name is Kristen. I'm actually colleague of Cédric's at Terre des Hommes. So it's been a pleasure to support the organization of this event, and mainly child and youth participation, which is the area where I work in. And I was fascinated to hear each of you speaking, Dawn, Amy, and Stephanie, in your respective remarks around the importance of providing platforms for children with lived experience to express their views and to have those views drive the policy and the practice. So whether it's around in terms of the legal services they receive, in terms of the policies around better investment, or in terms of the lived experience of children who have encountered, you know, remote hearings, etc., and that should drive the sort of reform. My question for you all maybe is, how do we make adults listen? Because in my 15 years of working in the field of children's rights and child participation, yes, there's a lot of work to do with children to ensure that they have the skills and the competencies to participate. There's a lot of space, there's a lot of work to make space for them to participate. But I think the hardest part comes after, which is actually how to encourage adults to actually take into consideration the views and to change their practices based on children's perspectives. So I don't know if each of you maybe have any experience of how that's been done in your respective fields. Thank you.
I mean, we can certainly speak about that during hours. So can I ask you perhaps one idea that you want to put in the pot, each of you?
One idea?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we need to make selection. You know,
Okay.
and priorities.
That's just limited. I do think adults are drawn to evidence-based, information and strategy, right? And I think pulling youth into that fold is critical. Like just kind of, it's sort of like the way you meet the audience where the audience is. And so when I mentioned the young person who spoke at this hearing, and they are doing a national study and a national report, it was really important that he wrote his own remarks. Of course, we have the data and the studies that could support anything he said. But we knew someone else on the platform would say those things. And so I thought it was really important in that space to understand your audience. So your audience needs to hear the data. The audience needs to hear what evidence has been presented and research has been done. But that life that's been impacted by the decisions and the policies is more powerful than anything that has been researched and studied. And so folks do respond to emotional data, and I think that's where the young people, bringing them into the room, having them sit at the table and just telling their story, their authentic truth, is actually the emotional piece that helps drive a legislator to sign the bill, or a policy writer to write the policy, just to include those pieces. So my thought is that it's the collaboration of the young person or the family member or adult who has a lived experience with the scientists. That's key, right? I'm not saying you exclude yourselves from the room. I'm saying you include in the room someone that has a perspective on what is happening. Because when I listen to kids, it's like a light bulb goes up. Because I did not see it that way. I didn't hear it that way. I didn't experience that way. But when you hear a young person say, well, when I got pulled from my home, you actually separated me from generations of my family. That was powerful. And that's not in the science. So it was just that added piece. So that's just my idea, which is the collaboration is critical. And of course, I think that emotional piece that comes from the lived experience is essential.
Yeah, I would very much echo what Dawn just said about the power of emotion and lived experience. And I want to lift up one project that our policy team worked on, which was looking at federal legislation and advocating around a particular piece of legislation, which is the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And in that case, we were able to bring youth who had lived experience in the system and specifically had their parents' legal rights terminated. And what the Adoption Safe Families Act requires or sort of lifts up is there's certain timelines by which, if a child has been in the child welfare system a certain number of months, their system is sort of required to then move to terminate parental rights. And what these children who had been through that experience themselves were able to lift up was both the harms of that, sort of the ridiculousness of those timelines in terms of no family who's going through, trying to dig themselves out of poverty or going through drug treatment or anything that sort of has to happen, that's often not going to happen in those timelines. And also just lift up the fact that thousands of children in the United States go from having their birth parents' legal rights terminated to not, and are not adopted. So they're basically going into a legal orphan status. And so that was a very effective way of lifting up those stories. And I just want to switch. I know you said one example, but just with my litigator hat on as well, I think there's ways that we can build opportunities for children's voice to be heard. And I know one method that we've sort of looked at in some of our litigation cases is how can we require in our negotiations with the state, for example, that there's opportunities for children to be involved in those negotiations and to have their voices heard in whatever implementation plans are created. And can we sort of require that in our negotiations? So, with our adult litigator hats on, we're building the structure, but we're building a space in there for kids to have their voices heard.
That's actually an excellent segue. So my organization focuses on supporting attorneys who represent children in delinquency cases. And what is so powerful, I think, about that is that the ethical duty of those attorneys is to represent the child's expressed interest. And so, at least in the US, there's a distinction between expressed interest and best interest. And best interest is us as adults substituting our judgment and saying, here's what I think you as a child need, often without ever asking the child what they want or need or are experiencing. And juvenile defense attorneys are ethically bound to advocate for the child's expressed interest. And so they're supposed to talk to their clients, find out from the client what has happened, what they want to happen as they move through the legal system, and then go into that courtroom and advocate on the child's behalf. And so our belief about the best way to incorporate children's voices is to make sure that every single child involved in the legal system has an advocate, a professional advocate who is bound to advocate for that child's express interest the entire time that they are involved in the legal system. And it's much more granular than the big picture things that we're talking about. But we really think that that is what is necessary to protect each child and to make sure that it's their express interest driving their interactions with the legal system.
Thank you very much, Dow, Stephanie, and Amy.